Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is the Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 25th of August 2025. I'm a little bit worse for wear this morning due to self-inflicted injuries concerning, not really injuries of the head, concerning imbibing too much and having too much of a good time last night. I did a video just before this one concerning my taxi ride back, speaking to a Romanian taxi driver who might as well have been a Russian troll. That was interesting. You can check that 10-minute video out at your leisure. We're going to start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You find them listed or linked in the description below. We have 870 personnel lost, so that's around about where we've seen it, popping, I think, back down from yesterday. Was up over 900 again yesterday, now popping below 900. Remember, these are human beings, of course, so we talk about numbers popping up and down and whatnot. These are people dying unnecessarily due to Putin's megalomaniacal, narcissistic imperialism. One single tank, 8 troop-carrying AFVs, a few more in that category, but still below the daily average. 48 artillery systems is another high number there, well over the daily average, almost double the daily average in that category. 79 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's below 100, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So I think things are somewhat quiet for the Russians compared to the peak of attacks previously. Indeed, we have had days where we've had 1,700? Is that the record? Personnel lost in a day. It might even be. Did we even reach 2,000 on one day? I can't quite remember now. In fact, the great thing about Dell's statistics that are linked below is that he has those numbers and the averages. You've got different types of averages on the data sheet. So if you go to the left-hand side, click on data, you have all of the individual days. As you go left of this is today's data sheet from the General Staff. You have the darker the red, the worse it is for the Russians there. So we have a fairly bad day for drones, and that will be as a result of the drones that took place both last night and the night before added together. And if it comes into, because it cuts off halfway through the night, you can actually have a bad day like today where it's not actually really hugely terrible in the last 24 hours, but because it adds, if they had a heavy load of drones in the second half of the night before and then a heavy load of drones in the first half of last night, then that will add together to be maybe worse than it might otherwise have been, as you understand, 24 hours. But everything else is fairly standard. And then we were looking at personnel losses. So we have an average of 840. So last night's or yesterday's personnel losses are still above average. You have a median of 140, a mode of 200, or daily record high 2,200. Wow! So that was a huge loss at some point. But you can see the 30-day rolling average is 953, and the 7-day rolling average is 864. So definitely ticked down from where we were. And then you can look at all of the graphs and whatnot that will show you what that looks like. And we've got that. I know my head's in a way a little bit, but the key part is this purple line coming down here. So that 2,200 was back here at that peak of losses taking place in 2024. Is that sort of October 2024 through to November, so October, November, December. That's when it was the worst for the Russians. And then it's been a steady decline since then as the battlefield dynamics have changed across the front line. Okay, so now we're going to go on to learn about 146 POWs yesterday being exchanged. Ukraine has not confirmed the swap, but Russian media have already released these videos. Said Tim White, actually, confirmation did come out, and we saw some. Here we go. Ukraine confirms the exchange. So sorry to confuse you. And there were a number of people. This chap here was the mayor of a particular place, and he's been in captivity for a couple of years. The change in his physical look is quite extraordinary. I think, yeah, here we go. So that's what he looked like when he was mayor just a couple of years ago. Volodymyr Mykolaienko, Kherson Mayor, the mayor of Kherson. He's returned from Russian captivity, captured in April 2022, and that's what he looks like now. Absolutely incredible difference there, but really good news that those prisoners have been exchanged, released. What else do we have? Okay, so we're going to look at personnel issues to begin with. This is the elimination of 17 occupiers who did not reach their positions at all, somewhere in the Liman direction. Nothing particular from this video. I mean, you can watch it at your own leisure. I won't play any of it because I'll get in trouble. But it's a personnel heavy set of losses. So 17 taken out in that particular area means that, you know, the Russians are losing troops fairly considerably in some sectors, and in fact the Ukrainians are sort of pushing back a little bit in areas of the Liman district. I think they've is it Novomykhailivka, another one of those Novomykhailivka, because there are many towns with the same name, I think was liberated there. We've also got a lot of footage from guided glide bombs coming out at the moment. Now, this is of the Ukrainians launching an airstrike on a Russian command post in Soledar. Soledar gets hit. So Soledar is north of Bakhmut, and it appears to be where they have quite a bit of staging for probably Chasiv Yar and so on. And this, they have command nodes here, and the Ukrainians clearly know about them because they keep hitting Soledar. We hear that the commander of the motorized rifle brigade and 5 officers, this is what Deep State is saying, were killed there. So really significant hits from the Ukrainians, doing some damage to the command structure of the Russians. What else do we have? Airstrike on a Russian command post in Korenevo. So another airstrike doing significant damage to command nodes, this time up in Korenevo. Now, actually, this happened 4 days ago, and I reported on it. A Ukrainian airstrike hits a Russian command post in Korenevo, Kursk region. Reports suggest commanders and personnel from Russia's 155th Naval Infantry Brigade were present at the time. So that was a claim from 4 days ago that I stated from no reports. The airstrike on the Russian command post in Korenevo reportedly killed top officers of the 155th. Again, because the 155th have been absolutely shellacked up there, and they have had their command struck multiple times. Now, it's interesting that no report says among them Major General Mikhail Gudkov, deputy head of Russia's Navy. I thought he was killed in a previous strike in the same area. So, yeah, I'm a little bit confused there. I'm fairly sure Gudkov was one of the previously mentioned ones. Colonel Sergey Ilyin, brigade commander, and several senior staff, including heads of comms and ops. So you start putting these together, and they add up to, you know, really affecting Russia's ability to effectively commit their troops and command troops in certain sectors. There are a couple of other guided glide bomb videos that have popped out as well, but you know, they don't tell us too much extra. Those two, I think, have some impact. Then we have the losses for August the 24th from Andrew Perpetua, the loss sheets for both sides. We have, for the Russians, more losses than the Ukrainians. That's going to be made up more of the ATVs. So if you add all of those ATVs onto the list, then it gets longer. And that's probably really the difference between the two, because the Ukrainians have lost more combat assets, mobility vehicles, the Russians losing more artillery. Then you've also got, marginally more surveillance and comm stuff from the Russians, more trucks. Okay, so let's look at the Ukrainian losses, see if there's anything here that is particularly significant. ANTPQ-36 radar there, that's sort of one you put on top of a Humvee. Fairly expensive, but not a sort of Nebo radar system or something like that. Not some kind of fixed array. We have a couple of pieces of artillery, single tank, BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicle. Most of these damaged rather than destroyed, which is good. APC, Snatch Land Rover M113. And then we get down to MRAPs, and most of the MRAPs here, out the 7 listed, were irretrievably lost. We've got the Novator, Humvee, Bat UMG, Titan. So a range of these. Titan comes from UAE. Interestingly, Bat UMG is an American one. Humvee as well. Novator, I think, is Ukrainian. Single truck, couple of ATVs, and then a whole host of civilian vehicles, which is fairly typical these days that they are hit on logistics routes, particularly. Both sides doing a good job of attriting those sort of vehicles. For the Russians, we have a fair number of pieces of artillery. We've got a half dozen, 5 tanks there, including a track guard and shed, a T-80, the other ones unlabeled, some AFVs, and then down to trucks, ATVs, quite a lot of motorcycles on the list, and civilian vehicles, assault larder. So, this is Andrew Perpetua saying, you've got, what is it? 6 assault larders. What he's saying there is these are larder cars that are being used to attack, right? And that feeds into the idea that Russia are losing fewer combat assets than the Ukrainians because they simply don't have them or aren't using them. And they are using instead unarmored vehicles, which must surely mean that they don't have them to use. They're not going to be holding them back because that will lead to unnecessary deaths of the Russian soldiers. Now, we know they're not great at command decisions like that, but they're not going to be, you would if you could, you aren't so you can't, right? They aren't using MRAPs and infantry fighting vehicles, I suggest, because they just don't have them. We heard from a Russian tank operative the other day that only 2 out of 16 tanks were operational. The rest were being kept way away from where he was, and some of them were being cannibalized. And also, they don't have the tank crews to operate them. So the same could be for the infantry fighting vehicles. They don't have operational infantry fighting vehicles. Why would it be massively different between tanks and IFVs? So one can, I think, be justified in assuming that they don't have infantry fighting vehicles, and they might not even have. It's probably easier to drive an IFV than a tank, and you need specific roles in a tank crew more so than an infantry fighting vehicle, I would have thought. But you might not have the crews as well, and so on and so forth. And this then translates into loss sheets that look like the Russians are losing more ATVs than the Ukrainians, because that's what they're using to attack, and unarmored vehicles. The Ukrainians still have access to proper military infantry mobility vehicles, MRAPs, APCs, and AFVs and IFVs. And so, the Ukrainians can lose more of these because they have more of them and they use more of them. There is now video footage of the MiG-29 in Yerevan in Armenia that hit a pole, and then fell off the road, and it's being towed here or something. It's being manipulated around, and look, that is very unfortunate. And hopefully that MiG-29 is, I think it's just rolled away. I think it's been detached from what was towing it, and then sort of rolls down the road a bit, takes a right turn, and then falls off the edge of the road. Hopefully that plane is damaged and can't be used for some time. That's what we'd want to see. But more of this, please, Russia. More planes rolling down roads and falling off roads. Thank you very much. But worth looking at again. Just what a cock up. Loved seeing a Russian cock up. Right, Euromaidan press saying Russians throw soldiers at the front, but Ukraine sends robots. Now, although we didn't see it on today's loss list, I've talked to you quite consistently. There's a single one there on Ukraine's loss list there. Russians don't have any today, but usually we see the Ukrainians have anywhere between sort of 5 and 10 UGVs on Andrew's list, and the Russians might have a couple. I think the Ukrainians have now really scaled up production of ground drones, and they're utilizing them, like I've said to you a million times, because they're substituting humans for drones, or drones for humans, so that both in an aerial drone and a ground drone domain, they are defending with robots and machines rather than humans, because they don't have the humans to spare. Machines now evacuate the wounded, they haul supplies, and even fight battles. So you've got logistics UGVs, you've got ones that lay mines, you've got ones that do medevacs, and you've got ones that fire machine guns and grenade launchers at the enemy. saving lives while rewriting the rules of war. And that first sentence, though, is key. Russia throws soldiers at the front, Ukraine sends robots. That is what Ukraine is trying to do. And they really have scaled up the production of these UGVs. There are so many now available for the Ukrainians to get their hands on, in principle at least. And that translates into seeing more of them on loss lists. And although it's bad to see like a big long list of green UGV, entries on Andrew's list of the UGVs there's only one today. But actually, I'd rather see that. If you're seeing UGVs lost, it means that Ukraine are using them in combat roles, likely, and they're losing them instead of losing humans. Right, we'll go on to look at the drones and missiles and distance munitions used overnight. The attack from Russia was 104 drones, no missiles. 104 drones, 76 were intercepted. That's a 73% interception rate. That's fairly low, and the reason it's low, as per normal, is that they were confined largely to the frontline areas, says Tim White. And as I said, as I've told you 1,000 times, if you are firing a long-range drone at, say, Konstantinivka, you've only got a couple of kilometers, if you're a Ukrainian, to acquire the target and shoot it down, and that means you'd have to have air defenses right on the contact line, because Konstantinivka is only just behind the front line. And so therefore the Russians really are going to almost always hit those frontline towns and cities with Shaheed drones if they fire them at them. So only you get a much higher interception rate if they're firing all their drones back at Lviv, where you have the entire width of the country to shoot those drones down. So 76 were still intercepted, but a bunch of them shot at the front lines. Now, the analyst says Russians changed their tactics with regard to Shaheeds. Russia has started to use strategic drones for frontline attacks. That's kind of what I was just talking about. A number of reports show that Shaheeds have and are being used extensively on parts of the front line instead of glide bombs. Not entirely clear if this is because airdrop glide bombs are in short supply due to Ukraine's strikes, both on airfields and factories, and that drones are cheaper. Actually, so I spoke to Andrew Perpetua about this some time ago, or he made a comment that actually they've been using these on the front line for an awful long time, the Russians. You don't always have it reported. So I don't know that there's been a categorical change of tactics by the Russians, but possibly just could be a case of scale. So they're now sending just far more, a case of way more being used on frontline areas. On the front lines. And this is something that I said it would be nice if the Ukrainians would be able to do, because if they can't use close air support, this is a kind of form of substitution for close air support. If you can't have another 70 planes given to Ukraine with the guided glide bombs and missiles that would accompany those planes, then functionally what do those planes do in close air support? They're taking out tree lines, and they're taking out buildings and Russian dugouts and positions. That's what the Russians did with their guided glide bombs in Avdiivka, and it forced the Ukrainians to retreat. It's an incredibly successful tactic. The Ukrainians need to be able to do this, but they don't have the planes. If you don't have the planes, can you substitute planes with one-way attack drones to do the same kind of thing? And that's what the Russians appear to be doing. So maybe they can't get their planes close enough, so they're hammering the front lines with attack drones, and it might actually be a more cost-effective way of doing it as well. So getting those planes up in the air and dropping those bombs. In the Ukrainian case, if they're dropping a French Hammer bomb, which is a really decent bit of kit, but that's fairly expensive as well. Is it cheaper for the Ukrainians to manufacture one-way attack drones and send them into frontline areas? I would have thought so, and I would like to see the Ukrainians use them more in that way. Now, to try and shoot down the drones, there have been many adaptations that the Ukrainians have made. One of them has been using old propeller planes like the Yak-52. And the Wall Street Journal's produced a video. I'm not going to play it for you. It's got a lot of speaking and then subtitles. But go and watch it again at your leisure. These are old planes, crew of two, one in the back with a gun, effectively, just shooting at drones, whether they're reconnaissance drones or Shahed drones. But I think more often probably reconnaissance drones than Shaheeds, actually. as you saw from the beginning footage here.
Ukraine is turning to old-school technology to fight back, hunting Russian drones with nothing more than Soviet-era training aircraft and rifles.
So there you can see is that a Zala Supercam? I don't know, the Supercam thing. Reconnaissance drone. So they're using these drones, these planes, as a way to take down these drones. Now you already knew that, but I'm interested in how many of these they've got. So I was wondering whether they only had one of these planes around Odessa, because you kept seeing the same sort of plane. But they say Yak-52 Cruise in the plural of it there. So that's good news that they've potentially got multiple of these. Now, I think they lost one of their pilots recently. I'm not sure exactly how. But yeah, anyway. Now, there were strikes on Ust-Luga yesterday. I'm going to show you this video that came out subsequently. Ust-Luga, it was gas hydrocracking or whatever it was, compression units for turning gas into liquefied natural gas. And I wonder, so if you see that drone, I don't know, it's probably a little bit small on your screen to be able to see that, but this is actually a drone that looks very much like a Shaheed drone. So it's not a Lyuty, and it's not one of the new FP1s. This is possibly because the targets were within 1,000 kilometers. So you can use a different type of drone that has that range, rather than this being 1,600 kilometers away or 1,300 like Yelabuga, where you're thinking, right, you've got to use either the Lyuty or the new FP1 to reach that distance. If it's below 1,000 kilometers, the Ukrainians obviously have other drones that they can use that might have better payloads, might go quicker, whatever. You're always having trade-offs between your range, payload, and speed, depending on what kind of engine you have and the fuel and so on and so forth. So anyway, Ust-Luga seems to have been attacked by a Shaheed or Harop type drone, says Special Kherson Cat there. So just noting the difference. Now, I don't know of any attacks last night by Ukraine, by the way, or at least there's no battle damage assessment, no kind of claims that they sent X, Y, Z drones into Russia, which is bizarre because I was expecting last night to be a potential. It was Independence Day, a potential for Ukraine to attack with a huge amount of drones and missiles and whatnot, and I don't think we saw that. Novoshakhtinsk last night was still burning. This is this oil refinery that is it is just a big ball of flames still. It's been burning for, is it the 5th day today now? And that seems to be in a spot of bother still. This has caused locally there to be water shortages as the fire departments have been trying to put the flames out. I think a fire train went up to St. Petersburg, actually, not there probably is one at Novoshakhtinsk too. Okay. Then we're going to go on to another picture released by the Ukrainians, and they keep doing this. We saw this with the videos of the facility creating the FP1 and FP5 drones and missiles, and now we have, so the Flamingo missile was a big thing, and now we're going back to the Long Neptune. So the Long Neptune, which is a sort of variant of the original Neptune missile that I think might have had some issues, so they've effectively just completely rebuilt it. Some are saying it's really got nothing to do with the original Neptune, but there are slight design similarities. Defense analysts claim they've spotted the first public display of what appears to be Ukraine's secretive long-range Neptune missile, according to Defense Express. The Long Neptune reportedly strikes targets 1,000 kilometers, so 621 miles away, compared to 200 to 400 kilometers of the original missile's range, so 2.5 times the range. The weapon appeared without official identification in the State Weapons Portal video released on Independence Day, but analysts identified it by distinctive X-shaped folding wings. It has been operational since March 2025. Over 6 meters in length without the booster, 1.5 meters longer than the standard Neptune. The fuselage diameter is expanded from 38 centimeters to approximately 50 centimeters for additional fuel capacity. Range is 1,000 kilometers, and the wing and tail surfaces are enlarged to compensate for increased takeoff weight. So it appears in this video, and yeah, they obviously have the there you got a Lyuty drone. They obviously have this to use, one would think. But the question is, with all of this stuff, like the FP1s and FP5s, although they are apparently using FP1s already, we've seen evidence of that hitting Yelabuga. When are we going to see these missiles used in significant ways? If they genuinely have this capability, what is their capacity, and why have we not heard of them being used yet, or seen evidence of them being used yet? I was hoping we might see something last night, but alas, it wasn't quite to be. Now, moving on to other bits and pieces, cyber partisans have hacked Russian TV and they broadcasted battlefield casualties and the truth about the war, according to HUR, so the military intelligence. A video showing Russia's fuel crisis, water shortages in occupied parts of Donetsk Oblast, Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, and Russia's military losses was aired simultaneously on 116 television channels on Ukraine's Independence Day, according to the source. This is like grade A trolling. That is absolutely brilliant. Good bit of information warfare from the Ukrainians, telling many Russians who probably don't have access to decent information and the truth about not only the war, but the situation for Russia domestically. 116 channels being hacked and having the truth broadcast, I think, is delightful for the Ukrainians. Now, the Russians are actually in some of their domestic information spaces, like in their newspapers, they are priming the readership with the idea that the economy is not looking good. I had someone on my threads yesterday contest that the Russian economy was in trouble. It's done, look, it's got this far, it's done this much, blah, blah, blah. I might find that actually. Now, it's this one, and you don't know Robert Moorfield, not seen that name too much. Is this a flyby comment, meaning, is it a troll, essentially? Robert Moorfield says, Jonathan, the Russian economy is not really in any trouble, at least not at this time. The Russian economy expanded, so, this is a moderate comment, so it's not like Yahoo for the Russians. The Russian economy expanded by 4.3% last year compared with 1.1% in the UK, 2.8% in the US. This means more Russians are doing better than they were before. Of course, this is not correct. So this is probably dependent on GDP stats from the Russians. Of course, Russian stats are already problematic for propaganda reasons, but also the GDP is contingent upon the war economy. So they're just producing more tanks and IFVs to throw onto the front line and get blown up, and even that is struggling at the moment. So if you think that translates to the Russians are doing better than they were before, when they're having to import potatoes from Mongolia and butter from the UAE, then I think you're sadly mistaken. Enough that the Kremlin is assured of strong continued support for its war against Ukraine. Russia continues to have many licit and illicit trading partners. While there are challenges, Russia's showing that they can meet those challenges. The only scenario, well, no, they can't meet the challenges. They're having an emergency oil meeting because they've run out of oil, of gasoline on the Kuril Islands today. So, there are certain areas where you just can't get gasoline, where you can't get petrol. We've got issues with crop yields being absolutely hammered, and train loading is right down. The building construction sector is absolutely in trouble. Car manufacturing, vehicle manufacturing, they're going down to 4-day working weeks, and then no one's buying vehicles. There was a vehicle that was released back in, goodness knows when it was, like months and months ago, and they've sold one, like a brand new Russian vehicle. They've sold a single unit. One unit. That's got to be like a world record of terrible economic performance in the sector. This Robert Moorfield is painting an entirely warped image of reality. The only scenario that would be likely to change that is the foreign military enforcement of sanctions to the point where Russia's trade with its trading partners would be near to entirely cut off. That's not going to happen. The nations imposing sanctions are not looking to go to war with Russia. Thus, sanctions, while they do hurt, tend to be paper tigers rather than effective means of pushing Russia to seek peace. They're not paper tigers. Tell me how many civilian aviation, how many units of planes, new planes, have been built in Russia. So they were planning on building 25. This year, I think they built one. and they can't build anymore because they can't get the components due to sanctions. So it's not paper tiger. Sanctions really do bloody hurt. They tend to be paper tigers, he says, rather than effective means to pushing Russia to seek peace. Even if sanctions were truly enforced, Russia's trade with China and North Korea, along with a few others, would surely continue. No one wants to take on Russia, China, and their few adjacent and loyal friends militarily. So the Kremlin regime is largely smiling. They know they can get through it, and they know that they are still holding back on what they could do to Ukraine if pushed very hard to do their worst to it. I think this is, again, very positive view of Russia, because you've got a complete lack of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles on the front line. So, they could do this if they were really pushed hard to do their worst to Ukraine. Well, I don't think this jives with reality here. They have those cards, I don't think they do, along with the ace up their sleeves. If Ukraine fails to compromise and seeks to escalate its war against Russia, what are you talking about? A nuclear card up its sleeve? Well, that's the end of the world as we know it. Always keep in mind the hardships Russia has endured historically. I mean, this is true. Like Russia, and this is kind of where Zaluzhny got it wrong back in the 2023 counteroffensive, is that he thought the Russians would capitulate if they took the kinds of losses that they did indeed take. And they don't. They don't capitulate because they are happy to take that level of attrition. The hardships that the Russian people can endure is indeed crazy. So that much is absolutely on point from Robert Morpheal here. They always endured and came through it with remarkable strength and resilience. So this is looking actually very, very trollish. And some of the language is a bit contradictory. So calling Russia's government a regime is usually a pejorative way of speaking about Russia. Some moderate language, but then they've always endured and came through with remarkable strength and resilience. So I'm not too sure about that. I responded to this and then deleted it. But anyway, I just think that doesn't jive with reality at all. And the Russian newspapers are telling you this. So in today's Russian papers, no sign that Moscow's position on Ukraine has changed, but plenty of indications of economic problems. Business stagnation, this is a quote from a Russian paper, 1 in 2 Russians looking for a second job, petrol prices hit new record high, so on and so forth. So, the Russian newspapers are telling you this, that it's hurting. And Robert Morpheal, though, saying, no, nothing to see here, no problem. Okay. We've had the issue between Slovakia and Hungary and Ukraine, with Ukraine hitting the Druzhba pipeline 3 times in recent weeks. Ukraine's foreign... So then you have Peter Shihato from Hungary and the Slovakians having a go at Ukraine, and Ukraine, even Zelensky having a go back, talking about Druzhba it means friendship. Literally, the word Druzhba means friendship, so the friendship pipeline. And he had a kind of play on the word friendship, Zelensky, in a reply, which I don't think Shihato, the foreign minister of Hungary, really got. And so he then replied, and now Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, has responded to Shihato, saying no one needs to tell the president of Ukraine what to say or when. So this is Shihato replying to Zelensky and then being slapped down by Sybiha. No one needs to tell the president of Ukraine what to say or when. He's the president of Ukraine, not Hungary. Hungary's energy security is your own responsibility. Diversify like the rest of Europe and stop relying on Russia. Boom. Nice one. So Slovakia's foreign minister Blunders says his country supplies 10% of Ukraine's monthly diesel needs, and has warned, so there's a bit of threat coming in from Slovakia now. It's warned that damaging the Druzhba pipeline risks cutting off critical fuel. Quote, "We understand Ukraine is under pressure, but this infrastructure is vital," he said, adding that Ukraine is hurting its own interests. In other words, you keep doing this and we won't supply you with 10% of your diesel fuel. I'm pretty sure Ukraine will be able to source that from somewhere else. Today in Finland, says Anton Gerashenko, the trial begins with the captain of the oil tanker Eagle S and his 2 assistants, who are accused of damaging 5 power and telecommunications cables laid in the Gulf of Finland. So this is the Chinese-owned Russian captained ship that dragged its anchor across a bunch of cables, damaging them, and then they've impounded the ship, the Finnish, done a good job there. So it'd be interesting to see how this goes, what happens as a result of that. Moving on. So I almost reported to you the other day, but didn't. The rationale was that I'm not 100% sure what's going on there. And okay, what am I talking about? So Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief, replaced by Syrskyi of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, was then moved sideways to be the ambassador to the UK. And there was a report within the last week that he was lining himself up to become the next president, or at least to run against Zelensky in the next election. And that this was all very divisive. And the reason I didn't report it is because A, I wanted to be sure of the sourcing of that, and B, it seemed like a hit job on Ukraine, really. It's like, oh, look at this divisiveness going on, and Zaluzhny's lining up, and it wasn't useful for Ukraine to have this be big time in the news. I wasn't not reporting it because it wasn't because I didn't want that to be useful by reporting it. Like, who cares what I say on the YouTube channel, apart from you guys. But it was more that it just looked like it was designed to be divisive. Anyway, then we're hearing today in The Guardian that JD Vance and his team tried to contact Zaluzhny after the disastrous Zelensky White House Oval Office meeting back in February. Vance's team, quote, tried various diplomatic and other channels to get through to Zaluzhny, said one of the three sources with knowledge of the effort. Zaluzhny, after consultation with Zelensky's chief of staff, refused to take the call. Zaluzhny refused to talk to JD Vance, who was looking for an alternative to Zelensky after the dispute in the White House. Vance's team wanted to organise a conversation with Zaluzhny just 3 days after the leaders' dispute in Washington, as, quote, Vance and others from Trump's entourage were apparently looking for potential alternatives to the troubled Zelensky. Moreover, when Zelensky flew to London after the Oval Office row to Starmer, Zaluzhny met him at the airport and posted a photo of them shaking hands on his social media. So I was wondering, as a result of this article coming out, whether that Zaluzhny for president could be a leaked thing from the Americans or something like that. You know, I do wonder. Anyway, there is some political chess going on, and it may not just be from Zaluzhny himself. Now, undoubtedly, in my opinion, Zaluzhny he's a political person, and he does have desires to become the next president, and he will run against Zelensky, and he will probably beat Zelensky. Right, so I think that's a given. But whether Zaluzhny would be trying to undermine Zelensky now at a time of war when you need that unity, and would be talking about his own desires and leaking stuff, I don't think so. I think this is more likely to be coming from someone else. So anyway, that's just my load of speculation there. Not so much fact or speculation on my part, but it does seem that the Americans did reach out, the Trump administration did reach out to Zaluzhny, and that would have been in an attempt to unseat Zelensky. And that is incredibly divisive. So if the Americans did it in February, I can see them having done it in the last week as well. Now, talking about America, and I've mentioned this in my videos recently, is an absolute disaster going on in the American DOD, in the Department of Defense, and the intelligence departments, the many of them that there are. I think Tulsi Gabbard is an absolute nightmare for American soft and hard power. America guts its intelligence agency, says the analyst. Trump doesn't like bad news, so if the jobs figures don't match his expectations, he fires the agency head, appointing someone who will tell him what he wants to hear about, not the truth. That's now being done to General Cruz, head of Defense Intelligence Agency. So I reported this. The head of the Defense Intelligence Agency has been sacked because basically the Trump administration doesn't like hearing what they don't want to hear. His crime, contradicting with evidence the presidential claims of the perfect bombing of Iran that were not as perfect as the administration wanted to portray. Meanwhile, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, the Cruella de Vil of the MAGA movement, has in effect loyalty tested the CIA and other intelligence agencies for their loyalty to Trump and found 50% less than satisfactory. That and the fact that they reported facts about American enemies nobody wants to hear. So then they're sacking like 50% of the staff in the CIA, supposedly. 37 Russian analysts predominantly have lost their security clearances. This includes disbanding the agency tasked with protecting elections from foreign interference, so that's been disbanded, and cyber agency as well, or it's been scaled back. So using the age-old budget constraints method, over 50% of the intel operators at key agencies are on their way out. Next time you wonder why there's something happening in the world and the Americans get caught with their proverbial pants down, you'll know why. This is really, really problematic, and I think deserves a lot more media coverage than it is being given. This is a huge problem for global security, and that includes for European security. This has a knock-on effect. The ideology is changing, the expertise is going, and the Americans will be in a worse place, and as a result, a knock-on effect will be in a worse place. Now, going just the last couple of things on the Russians. Here we have a video that's been released of someone, it appears, that's against the war in Russia being hauled away, and being against the war, says Jay in Kiev, is now deemed a mental disorder in Putin's hellscape. So this guy's being taken away by it looks like, psychiatric officials or whatever. And neighbours and co-workers report you, and guys just show up to cart you off to the mental ward. No expensive trials or lawyers to clog up the system, just gone. So this might be a way of getting rid of dissent without having to go through a legal process. You just declare them mad, and then you lock them up in a mental institute. And that's the end of the dissent against the war. So I found that pretty distasteful. And then this video, which is kind of, I think, emblematic of what's going on in Russia with the rise of ultra-nationalism. This is a really disturbing video of an Uzbek here, a guy from Uzbekistan getting lectured, told he's a slave, an effing Russian slave, and saying, you should be going to work. I am working, you should be, it's horrific. Just shouting into this guy's face, shouting in his car, saying there's nothing in Uzbekistan, you effing came here for an effing mouth, you're an effing a-hole, blah, blah, blah. You came into effing work, you came to work. Okay, I'm working, the guy says, so effing work. Well, I would be working if you weren't shouting in my face. But this kind of thing, just is a reflection of the sense of Russian entitlement, the sense of Russian superiority, the sense of Russian imperialism. If this is how you treat someone from Uzbekistan, which is someone from in the Russian sphere, then my goodness, you can see that what the opinion might be about someone from Ukraine as well. So Uzbekistan is a former, member of the Soviet Union, now a country in its own right. But, this is how some Russians will see Uzbeks and Tajiks and so on and so forth. Just, it helps to explain, I think, the Russian public's, broadly speaking, approach to Ukraine. You've got, say, 30%, well, they say 15% really for the war, 15% really against the war, and everyone else in the middle kind of apathetic. But you've probably got a lot of people in the middle that really have, informed by Russian state media over decades, views of their superiority, of some kind of ethno-nationalism, as you can see on display here, that will feed over into being apathetic about a horrific war in Ukraine. Because, hey, Ukraine, whatever. Yeah, anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.